call this planning commission meeting open. First, we'll start with roll call.
Commissioner Gautier.
Here.
Commissioner Bello.
Here.
Commissioner Tyso.
Here.
Commissioner Bannon.
Here.
And Commissioner Hall.
Present. Okay. Next agenda item is approval of minutes. And these are minutes from the February 15th Planning Commission. Has everyone had a chance to review those minutes?
I'm sure I'm abstaining since I wasn't here.
This was the workshop.
Oh,
yeah.
Oh, I was there, I moved to, that we should approve.
Okay, we have a movement to approve. Have a second?
Second.
Carol seconded that. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, and so we have 4 ayes and an abstention. Okay. And so then next item is to consider old business, and that is the Title 16 and Municipal Code Amendments.
Chair Hall, can I interject
Sure.
just briefly? One, we need to go through election of officers,
Okay.
and we need to adjust the agenda to hopefully put the system development charges presentation ahead of that, but I need to make sure that Todd is actually, so,
We move forward with the election of officers while you confirm Todd's presence.
yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, so now we have seated a new planning commission, and so we need to decide amongst ourselves who will be the chair and who will be the vice chair. Is anyone interested in the role of chair of this planning commission? And I will say I am, and so am happy to take on that role unless there is interest from any of you.
There's interest, but you can have it.
Any discussion?
Move the question. I move the question.
I second. Okay, all those in favor of the chair remaining the chair, please say aye.
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 Okay,
All not in favor?
and then we'll need to have a vice chair, and is there anybody interested in this role?
That would be
Kara Bellows has voiced her interest. Anyone else? And move that we select Carol as our vice chair of the planning commission. We have a second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, so moved.
Thank you.
Just for clarity purposes here, had Gretchen moved
Mhm.
and Carol seconded for Chair Paulson, and then I had Chair Paulson move and
Lizzie seconded.
all right. I think we go ahead with the presentation on the code because I don't see Tim Wood or Tom Chase on.
Okay, so we are not adjusting the agenda. We will continue as the agenda stands. Okay. Okay, so this will be a public hearing. I call to order the City of King City Planning Commission public hearing. We have scheduled a legislative land use hearing related to the adoption of King City Community Development Code. The hearing format for this proceeding is different from quasi-judicial land use proceedings, so members of the public provide testimony in the same manner. Members of the public may participate in person, in writing, or both. We ask that a copy of all written materials be submitted to our city clerk so that they can be made part of the record of the proceedings. The grounds for an appeal of a legislative decision are contained in ORS Chapter 197, specifically ORS 197.620. Following a staff report this morning, we'll take public testimony. For in-person testimonials, a number dispensers in the back of the City Council room. Please grab a number if you've already done so. Also located in the same place as the hearing comment registration form, please write your name and other required fields. For testimonials via Zoom, please write your name, address, and whether you are in support, in opposition, or neutral in the comment section. Names will be assigned a number and in that order, and then we'll call you forth. When I call your number, please give your hearing comment registration form to the city recorder, identify yourself, state your address, and make your statement. The maximum amount of time allotted for a testimony should be 5 minutes for individuals. Okay, so I call to order the public hearing regarding case number LU 2023-04, Title 16 Community Development Amendment and the Municipal Code at 9:44 a.m. This is a legislative hearing, so we do not follow the strict ex parte disclosure requirements. First, does any member of the audience wish to challenge the jurisdiction of the Planning Commission to hear this matter? Hearing none, does any member of the Planning Commission want to disclose any actual or potential conflicts of interest? Personally, I would like to have it on the record that there have been allegations made about a relationship between my family and Metro Land Group. Metro Land Group has used an image of myself and my family on their website, but in no way does that constitute a business relationship to that entity, and the use of this image should not be construed as a conflict of interest in my service to the King City Planning Commission in any way.
Madam Chair, in the same venue, there's an image of me in one of the photos, and I have no connection with Metropolitan Land Group at all. It was just an old photo taken.
Give some background on that, but,
Please.
the photos were part of a, original, public information campaign that the city sponsored in cooperation with Metropolitan Land Group before we started the concept planning. And so it was a photo shoot that we did at the park, and we asked all of our city councilors and planning commissioners to show up, bring their families, so that we could get some family photos at the park. We didn't have to do a bunch of public release waivers and everything else, and they were already public body members, and their image and likeness was already out there. So that's where those photos originated from. The city, and whether this was something the city endorsed to get the message out that we were going to be doing a bunch of concept planning and urban growth boundary expansion. MLG just happens to have a large chunk of land in our urban growth boundary expansion, and therefore uses the image to also bolster their image for what they're trying to accomplish on their property as well. So there's the correlation, and that's where this photos.
What is the group?
The group is MLG, it's Metropolitan Land Group, and they own the piece that's around Al's Farm and Garden on the far west side next to Roy Rogers.
Can that show a reference? I mean, kind of here's the planning commission, and they're on our website, and they're,
I guess that's the perception, right? But
yeah,
the truth of the matter is there's no connection between those two agencies, other than that they're a supporting member of the community in regards to our planning efforts.
I had no knowledge that this image of myself and my family were used until the allegations of a business relationship was made. I didn't literally know until last month.
I didn't know either. I was on the city council at the time.
Picture cute, right?
Really
It used to be on the King City website. So, images are out there.
Okay, moving forward. Does any member of the audience wish to challenge any individual member of the Planning Commission? Hearing none. For all those wishing to testify, please be aware that if you fail to raise an issue in person, Zoom, or by letter today, or to the Planning Commission, you will be unable to raise that issue at a subsequent item on appeal to the City Council or at a subsequent time on appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals. Testimony and evidence must be directed towards the criteria that staff will describe or other criteria in the plan or land use code which you believe apply to the decision. Failure to specifically address the approval criteria that staff will describe also precludes the raising of an issue related to those criteria on appeal. Okay, at this time, I call for the staff to present the proposal along with applicable approval standards and make a recommendation.
I'll start and kick us off here. This is a continuation from June 28th, 2023. Staff presented at that point in time on a lot of the code amendments that are before you today. We've had a chance to go through and address a number of the deficiencies that we saw and the reasons for us wanting to table them. There's also a staff memorandum provided to you this morning from Mr. Leiden addressing the final components of formatting and any kind of modifications that we're thinking we need to do before the final document is adopted by the city as a function of our ordinance system. So with those two elements before you today, the revisions that are in the packet, you'll find that hopefully on your in front of you, you also have a printout of our presentations today that Mr. Leiden is going through. Should have the memo as well as the comments that were provided from Metro and Metropolitan Land Group. To add to your comment section, in the back of your package, you'll find the comments that were submitted at the previous Planning Commission meeting in June. Again, this is a continuation of that and an elaboration of elements that were not quite finished at the June 28th public hearing. So again, this is a continuation from June 28th public hearing on land use matter 2023-04. And then we also have 2023-05, which is the SPC methodology. But we're not asking the Planning Commission to make any motion or action on the SDCs because that goes straight to the City Council, but it's there for your general reference and information. And with that, I'll pass it off to our City Planner, Keith Leiden, to go through his staff report and address any questions that you have with the findings that are in here.
In the packet that you received earlier, there was a memorandum staff report. It's fairly lengthy because there were quite a few findings that needed to be made. So the key criteria that we have to address in order to make these amendments, it's summarized on page 5 of that staff report, and that includes the Oregon Statewide Planning Goals, the Metro Regional Growth Management Functional Plan, Metro UGB decision, for which there were some conditions of approval that I think you folks are familiar with, that we have to address. King City Urban Planning Area Agreement, and the King City Comprehensive Plan. So those criteria are addressed in the staff report. As I mentioned, it's pretty lengthy. It's an exciting read, I'm sure you can enjoy it. And I can answer any questions on that. What I do have is a PowerPoint presentation that just summarizes what we have in the code amendment package. And I'll go through those, and then Marcy McAnally is here with me, and we're expecting that we'll have questions and conversation after the PowerPoint. So let me just go ahead and start. We have a code amendment package that's really addressing two areas of the city. Primarily, we're focused on the Kingston Terrace master planning area, which you can see on the map as the area on the left. But there are also some amendments in this package that would affect that would have an effect citywide. So it would include the existing city plus the Kingston Terrace area. Next slide, Ron. And as you're also probably aware, we've been working on a package of plan and code amendments here for some time, including amendments that were recently made to the comprehensive plan. Transportation system plan was adopted, the first one that we've had in the city, and also the Kingston Terrace Master Plan. We're now moving over to the code side of the amendments that we need to make to support the Kingston Terrace Master Plan and actually provide the tools to implement. This will include some specific pieces that I'll go through here with the rest of this presentation. Next slide. So the role of the Community Development Code, by the way, just so I know we have, well, I think everybody's familiar with this, so the things, the terminology is confusing, but the Community Development Code, as we have referred to oftentimes, is part of the King City Municipal Code, and it's called Title 16 in the Municipal Code, and so we call it Title 16, we call it Community Development Code, we do the same thing as far as what we're talking about here. But the role of the Community Development Code is to implement the master plan, and particularly looking at a lot of things that we've discussed during the formation of the master plan, creating new town centers and multiple neighborhoods, a mix of housing types for different range of incomes and household sizes, protecting natural resources, and ensuring that we do provide for all facilities and services that this development will require, and obviously, I think there's going to be the SPC part that's going to be discussed after this. Next slide, Ryan. So in Exhibit A of your packet, and this is, again, as part of this staff report that you were given, Exhibit A includes all of the CDC amendments that are related to implementing the Kingston Terrace Master Plan, and in a few cases, just some cleanup or correction items that will, in the CDC that will apply citywide as well. The main thing that we're going to be talking about, and the bulk of the work has been on this new Kingston Terrace district, which is in the zoning district portion of the Community Development Code, and it just shows up as a new zone district that's specific to Kingston Terrace. We have some amendments in Chapter 1624 to definitions. So we are keeping definitions that we use and new ones that we're creating still in one place in that part of the Community Development Code. Article 2, procedures. We've done a cleanup there. The city has informally referred to and used 4 different procedure types, but it hasn't always clearly described what those are. So what we are doing here is making some amendments so that we are clear about the procedure types and formally calling them Type 1, which is our administrative review. That's a review that people there is no public review of it. It's like taking a building permit or a sign permit that meets all the requirements. It's just a staff review, end of story. Then there's a Type 2, which is a city manager review, where there is notice given to surrounding property owners of an impending decision. Folks are given an opportunity to comment before the decision is made, and then they receive notice of the decision afterwards, which they could appeal to the planning commission if they chose. Type 3 is the one that we're most familiar with, I think. It's the one where in this case it's coming before the planning commission, subdivisions, site plan reviews, and so forth. And that would stay the same as it has. The one difference is we are describing 2 types of a Type 3. One that would just go to the planning commission for a final decision. And then we have a few that happen occasionally that's for zone change on a particular piece of property. Those are also considered a quasi-judicial action, just like a subdivision or site plan review. But the difference is the city council still needs to make the final decision. So in that case, the procedure follows all the way the same, but instead of the planning commission making a final decision on a zone change, it would make a recommendation to the city council. Then finally, we have Type 4, which is a legislative action like we're doing today, where the normal course is that it goes to the planning commission to make a recommendation. Let's see, then Article 4 with development standards, there were a few places where it made the most sense to amend the community development code, just to improve it generally, but then also some of these sections would apply to, Kingston Terrace as well. And then finally, we've had a placeholder for chapter 116, 192 about annexation, but it was a title only. There was no description of what that meant. We have a description now for annexation process, so that's new, and obviously we're being for next slide, Mitch. Oh, no, sorry. Hey, you over there, whoever you are. The next, in Exhibit B, we have some cleanup items to other parts of the municipal code, that are relatively minor, just to kind of clarify things, on what's meant and so forth. There's a new section, overnight camping that, the city felt it needed to, be aware that actually out, and Mike can certainly elaborate.
Just as a point, also in chapter 2.16, it calls out a specific number of planning commissioners for quorum. So I want to modify that, so it doesn't really call out a specific number, but it calls out the majority of sitting members of the commission constitutes a quorum, not 4 or 3 or whatever. It's just the majority of sitting members. So that's some language change that we need to modify, before it gets final. Did you want me to talk about overnight camping regulations?
Oh, sure, any of that you want to talk about.
These other changes, the council rules of order, nuisances, open burning, overnight camping, these are to bring us more in compliance with one, TVFNR regulations on open burning, state regulations on what constitutes a quorum. Overnight camping is the Boise case that went to the U.S. Supreme Court, so we have to have designated area for overnight camping. We've designated the area on the east side of City Hall, on city property, along 99W here, and from 9 p.m. to 7 a.m. And that way our police are on site and can keep track of any nefarious activities and can clean it up. So that's kind of the camping thing. It also restricts camping in our park areas or natural resource land. So keeps it very limited, very contained, and where we can keep a close eye on it.
Is that on the other side of the fence?
Yeah.
You've got City Hall, a little bit of land, a fence, and then there's a little area between that and the sidewalk.
Yep, there's a stretch there, where the grass is over there, and it literally goes from, the edge of the parking lot on our south end, up here to the north, where our Connex is. The strip there.
Is it being used?
Just us, we use it for irrigation and lawn and that sort of stuff. So that's about it. The other is the nuisance thing. We spoke about this at the last hearing, raising the decibel level to something that's actually above a whisper. We even brought in the decibel meter last time to kind of illustrate what 55 decibels, exceeding 55 decibels is. And just the rustling of paper is essentially 55 decibels. So us talking here is probably about 85 decibels. So anything, actually a lawnmower is like 100 or so. So raising those limits to something that's more reasonable, as well as keeping in the code the right to quiet enjoyment and those sort of things is still in there. So that's what the nuisance was. Covered the open burning, the nuisance, the overnight camping, council rules of planning. So.
Turning to the Kingston Terrace again, proposing a unique approach here for how land use and development is regulated. We have, as you know, 4 new zone districts for each neighborhood that's been talked about in the concept plan and in the master plan. They correspond with that. And you see the map here where those areas are going to be The gray areas intervening are the resource areas that, will, I think, likely have the zone designation underneath them, but then the resource protections will, in some cases, prohibit development or at least limit development in those areas. That's yet to be determined. But as properties get annexed, then these different zones would be applied, as part of the annexation. We propose not to have any.
From Hillsborough to Gresham, cities across Oregon have until July 1st to update.
That'd be the camping ordinance.
Must be an exciting presentation. She's surfing the web up.
That's right, that's right.
We have density minimums, but no maximums. So that's a change from what we have in our code today, where we have a maximum and then have a minimum based on what that maximum is, of 80% for a minimum. And we allow multiple housing types in all different zones. So I was asked by a Metro staff person yesterday how we're going to assure a minimum density if we're allowing single-family detached homes in all these different zones. And the response is it's going to be really the way we do it now, that you can have that housing type in your development, but you still have to meet the minimum. So obviously that means that you won't be able to just put in a single-family detached subdivision exclusively, because you won't be able to meet the density requirement. So I gave an example to him that was recent here in King City, just immediately south of the Highlands. There's a relatively new subdivision that's done by Steve Brown, where you have a small apartment complex on 131st, and then to the east of that you have detached single-family homes. He wanted to do all detached single-family homes, but I told him, well, you can't meet the minimum density that way, and so we came up with this idea that he could do an apartment complex on the one end and do the other. So that's the way, you know, that's a simple example of basically how this would work here. And then we have design standards that focus on creating good pedestrian environments. Next slide.
Give his presentation, and then we'll have time for comments.
And along with the zones, we also have a regulating plan that prescribes where the main backbone streets are going to be. We call them, those are typically the collector and neighborhood routes that are identified in our TSP. So these alignments, more or less, follow what is in the TSP for where they're supposed to be and where the intersections are supposed to be, and so forth. And there are some requirements to make sure that this backbone street, as development occurs, actually gets done. We have street design and connectivity requirements for maximum block sizes and perimeters and pedestrian connections and those sorts of things that build on what a lot of the things that we have right now in Chapter 16. Well, that talk about sort of requirements to make things more walkable and without bars. Parks and open space requirements by neighborhood are also included in our regulating plan, and like I said, we have some CDC amendments. Look at a little bit more. Please. One of the things that we talked about on the 26th that wasn't really ready at that point was how to regulate the upland wildlife habitat conservation areas that have been identified by Metro. So in this map, and the map that you have in your packet, this was done by Metro. The blue areas show the riparian zones that are currently protected by Clean Water Services, and then the orange and kind of brown colors would be the upland habitat areas that the city is obligated to protect under the rules. So Metro has a model ordinance that quite frankly, is sort of a convoluted mess, and I think the Metro staff will admit that. So we're still using that as a starting point, and then I greatly simplified what they had in their model code, trying to follow what the main intent was of what we're trying to protect. And fortunately, we did receive an email from Metro staff this morning and they are finding that, what we have in the draft would comply with their Title 13 rules, so that's good news to see if anybody else has already about what we're proposing, but, we're off to a good start here. Basically, what it does is that the riparian zones that are protected by stormwater services, at least in this area, often are heavily wooded. Many times they're pretty steep, ravine-type areas. So they're really, for the most part, probably not going to be developable at all. And then you have these areas beyond the riparian zones that are protected by Metro that still have some environmental and habitat value because they still tend to be wooded, particularly the ones that are in the brown color. Those still tend to be wooded. They're just basically a little bit farther away from the center of the corridor. And then the ones that are more of the, and those brown ones would be then the class A, as we're calling them, habitat areas. And then the orangey or orange color is class B. Considered to be of lesser value because the tree canopy is much more scattered or in some cases non-existent.
I mean, valued from a habitat standpoint or valued from a development standpoint? Habitat, okay.
So in the requirements, I did allow for a minimum amount of development almost regardless of the situation, because we do have some smaller parcels that are almost entirely, for example, inside a class A habitat area. And then you say, well, no, you can't cut any trees, you can't do anything. Well, you maybe have just stripped any development value at all away. So the idea is that you allow for a minimum space, at least they could put in something small, a house or a few or something like that, so that you're not just taking all the development. That seems to be okay with Metro, so. What you question. Next slide, please. Then turning to the development review process, there are really going to be well, 2 steps for sure, and in many cases a 3rd step. And the first one, as we talked about a little bit, is annexation, simply turning the property into the city so it can be developed. Then there is the development plan review. So this is, development plan review is procedurally, it's going to be very similar to site plan review. It would still be a planning commission review type of procedure. It's just that the criteria that we use would be. And then the majority of the cases that we see that are going to come in, they'll also involve some sort of land division. Either they're going to be creating a residential subdivision, or townhomes, or single family, or detached, or what have you, or it's going to be a bigger piece of property that's going to get divided into some larger piece of property for an apartment complex or a condominium development or commercial development, so forth. They'll probably have land division for almost all of them. So with the annexation, when annexation is proposed, there'll be a conversation with the city and the developer. We'll inform the developer what the zoning would be. It would be based on that map that we showed you before on the 4 different neighborhoods. And the specific location of the line will depend partly on where the streets wind up. So there's going to be a little bit of, well, this is generally where it is, and then we nail it down once you have the development as to where the exact line goes. And then we would also have an annexation agreement, which would be a new tool for us. It would be an agreement to really outline between the city and the property owner or developer coming in, just what the basic expectations are for future development, what kinds of infrastructure, how we address mobility and transportation, parks, environmental protection, et cetera, is going to be addressed. And then also a conversation about how many dwelling units as a minimum are going to be expected from the part of a development that comes in. Next slide, please. Then once the property is annexed, then there would be a development plan review. And this would be, looking at the, regulating plan that you see as part of the code amendments that we have. And we would be making judgments on the proposal based on the dimensional and density standards, design standards in there, street circulation, parks, open space, environmental protection. And ultimately, this would result in a development, which would be a sort of part two of the annexation agreement. The annexation agreement would generally outline expectations, and then the development agreement would very specifically define what those expectations were. So I think you could consider it as a more formal version of conditions of approval. In some cases, there's going to be an obligation on the city to provide something for the developer. There might be some major street improvements or something that are going to be financed by SDCs, for example, that would be the city's responsibility. Maybe some for water, sewer, et cetera. So it would just be, okay, we've got a deal, and here's your responsibilities, and here's your responsibilities. And then this slide just illustrates the different pieces that I've just talked about and how all of those will be fit together in this development. As I indicated, land division is often going to be a component here, and it would be processed along with the development plan review application. Next slide. As I mentioned, we've got the Exhibit A requirements, which I've just gone through and giving you an overview of those. We're expecting we'll just have some comments, questions, discussion. We're recommending that there's a positive recommendation of the City Council. Last slide, run. And then for the cleanup provisions that Mike talked about primarily, we'd be interested. Let's see, what else? Oh, so you did receive a two-page memo, just a paper one today. I have a copy here, but as you might guess, I've got Ronnie, I've got it on. As you might guess, this is just like an undertaking to come up with all these different new requirements and putting it together, and then focusing on does this thing work or not, and so on and so forth. And as we reviewed the draft of it before you, we can see that there are a few fixes that we would like to make, and they are not related to content or what we're proposing as far as how things would work. It's more just making sure that it's really more readable and that we don't have any places where people can have misunderstanding. So I'll just go through those really quickly. One is just simply format and style. You maybe notice sometimes, for example, we say Southwest such and such street, and other times we just say such and such street, and sometimes we're using contractions and sometimes we're not, and some of those things. And so we'll want to go back and just take a final cleaning of that to be consistent, using our community development format as the standard, with the one exception, and that is to actually use numerals for numeric standards instead of spelling it out, which just drives me. As an administrator, there's nothing worse than having something say 250 feet written in text, and you're looking for the standard, scanning the page, and you can't see it because, of course, it's camouflaged in there somewhere. So that would be the one exception, because I think ultimately we'll go back and make sure that the rest of the codified code uses numbers for numbers and not this. References. We noticed that we still have a couple references where it just refers to a figure but not the number, or that kind of thing, and we'll need to get that cleaned up. Terminology, I think we mostly have everything correct, but a few things crept in there that aren't defined. So for example, you'll see the reference to apartments a few times. But we don't have a definition for apartments. We need multifamily, but anyway, it's stuff like that. We'll just need to clean it up. And then there was one with the organization, after we looked at this some more and had tried to run, really, okay, so if we have a development in here, and then how do we run through this? We thought that some of the order probably could be adjusted a little bit, and we have that outlined. So it would just be taking the parts that you're seeing here and maybe putting a little more reasonable, logical order now that we've had a little more time to think about it. So we apologize for that, but it doesn't change the content. So at least the nitty gritty of what we're talking about doing, what the result will be, that doesn't change. So with that, I think I'll stop and as you know, I'm here also to help any questions or comments or concerns you might.
So before we do commissioner statements and questions, do we move forward with the audience component of this public hearing? So a little bit longer, sorry, question. Okay, so then, does any member of the audience wish to speak in favor of this application? Be online or written testimony to that effect? Okay. Does any member of the audience wish to speak in opposition to this application?
Online, Ryan?
Okay. And then does anyone wish to provide neutral comment? I'd like to clarify, there was a Exhibit C in the June agenda from Mike Dahlstrom. Was that addressed last month? I
It
don't
was
recall.
addressed, in the revisions that you have before you. So it's actually in your comments, page 200 and, I want to say 13, I believe. No,
And that's me.
yeah, hang on, it should be in the very back. It's one of the first things that you guys received. It's 213 is, yeah, 214 is Mr. Dahlstrom's
Okay.
comment on the design standards.
Okay, so we do have,
And I see how many of these did we actually implement on?
So that's typical standards that should be in the code.
He requested consideration of the following amendments, design standard in 16.114.080 for solar panels attending electrical distribution devices shall be installed on all multifamily units over 4, commercial over 2,500 and public buildings. All non-single family solar installations may require elevated collecting panels. Single-family home installations shall remain on the following roof line. He actually went through a lot of decent consideration that,
It's from the county code.
All around, at least sight lines, views and stuff.
view sheds,
It's a hard one.
right?
Um,
Is the, solar panels, is that, like, feasible?
Mm-hmm.
Because to me, like,
I think the solar panel one is definitely feasible.
because, I mean, like, what, we don't know in 50 years if solar panels are even going to be, like, technology used. Do we write in our code things like that when we don't know future technology? Like, that's kind of,
You go back and modify the code later.
you do, I mean, is that wise? I don't know, that was just a question I had. Maybe they'll be like roofing tiles instead of these big bulky solar panels that produce a lot of waste ultimately.
Well, you can arrange, I think what it's doing is encouraging people to arrange their houses.
With roof lines in
Yeah,
certain
with roof lines.
ways, I like that.
And Paul, on that particular issue, with respect to development, do we have any language that would encourage people to specifically align their housing to maximize, solar
Solar gain.
gains and, specifically encouraging folks on single-family housing to,
I think, the basic backbone street system will help in that regard quite a bit, because its primary orientation, the long blocks are generally going east-west. And so as long as you're within, 30 degrees of,
Yeah.
east-west,
yeah.
that the solar benefits are really good, even passive ones. So this goes way back when, a lot of jurisdictions, adopted solar access ordinances, including King City. This is back when subdivisions of 5,000 to 10,000 square feet was the norm, just for context. So it's become obsolete in some ways. But, one of the studies that the State Department of Energy did, just to look at houses, if your orientation was good and you did nothing else different, no extra windows, no solar stuff, no nothing, that your energy consumption on average would go down about 20%. Because your glazing tends to be to the front or the back of the house, obviously. And then, if you are set up so that particularly if the west sun is hitting all your glazing in the afternoon, then you cook, you need AC, and then in the winter, then you're shaded by either your neighbor's house, or you don't have much glazing on that side of the house, and so you don't get the solar benefit in the winter, just from sun coming in the window or not coming in the window at the wrong time.
Yeah.
So, I think we'll get a lot of benefit just by the way things are oriented, and that everything else is going to tend to flow, because you're going to have the longer blocks tending to be the east-west blocks.
I read in here somewhere about was that for electrical cars?
So that was in the master plan. The master plan had some of that in there, where it was promoting adequate electricity infrastructure to the house to promote electrical vehicles, as well as having charging stations in commercial areas. So that was a component of the master plan. I'm not sure that we have any specifics in the code that would enforce that sort of thing. It's also a building code element. So it's not necessarily a land use, but a building code when we require the amount of electricity to the unit. But it's something that we can definitely look at, and we would need to kind of work with Claire Company, and bring Claire Company in to kind of make sure that we're in compliance with state, form, or universal building code. The universal building code.
Yeah,
right?
if you're gonna have that kind of requirement for developers, you're gonna wanna make sure it's clear and unambiguous
Right.
in the building code.
And there are some rules that, are encouraged by the state now, to at least provide the conduit. Because sometimes that's the most expensive part of retrofitting it later. You paved everything, you got a hardscape in, and then, oh, well, now you want me to run electricity out to here? Then it gets expensive, whereas if you have the conduit, then
Yeah,
it's relatively easy.
Well,
And the
maybe-
conduit isn't that expensive.
maybe staff could, make a note that code needs to be revised sooner rather than later, since we're looking at development, within a year or two.
I think also with the popularity of electric cars going up, I think that, it's probably not gonna be something you're gonna twist arms very hard to accommodate, because you're just gonna realize that the demand is there, people wanna do this stuff, and, they should be fighting it.
I want to, make suggestions? Right there and other comments.
One of the concerns I have about the, solar access is that it's in conflict with planting trees. And, I know that, I lost a big oak that covered 5 lots. But now my electricity bill, because I had to get air conditioning, is $200 a month, whereas it was $15 before I had them. And, so that tree was providing incredible energy savings for us. Well, I can't plant a tree because then I don't have solar access, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, how can we work this out?
Well, one way you can work it out, if we want to get into the solar, maximizing that benefit, is that you just need to be careful, particularly what kinds of trees you plant on your south side. So, some trees are going to be very bad for solar.
Yeah.
Because, their branching patterns are thick, or they don't drop their leaves. For example, pin oaks, they keep their leaves until the spring, so they shade you all winter anyway. And some trees are very good for solar. So, for example, I planted a honey locust tree on the south side of our house 40 years ago, and it was the best thing I ever decided. Because it leaves out really late, and it drops leaves pretty early. Branching pattern isn't very dense, so we get plenty of sun through that tree all winter, and then lots of shade in summer. So some of it's just selecting the right thing to put on the south side and where you do it, so that you can have benefits for both winter and summer.
I would say, one of my things is that I really want to beef up our tree policies, so that we don't plant, let's say,
English plane trees.
Norway maples are, I think Norway
Or
maples.
cottonwood.
Oh,
Well,
cottonwood.
no, there's certain trees that their root systems will attack your, water lines and.
Yeah, but, some of them also, spread.
Yeah.
I think that could be another thing that we can work on later. So the city has not officially adopted a street tree list
Okay.
in an ordinance, and so I think that would be something that would be a really good follow-up topic, and then we could get some expert advice on what really makes best kinds of street trees. And then also we could look at that from a solar perspective too. Put that criterion in there as well, because you can come up with some things that'll work well for both.
Right.
Because, you don't want to lose your shading in the summer.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
And our upland habitat, Lori's doing this, is a lot of Oregon oak that are, 100, 200, 300 years old.
Right.
And so maybe we should identify what trees those are. That's a real biggie in Oregon.
Right.
Isn't there something in there about tree inventory and the size of trees and the drip line to protect those groves?
There's development requirements. When a developer comes in, they'll need to show where all the trees are, 6 inches deviation.
Right, yeah.
And then in these upland habitat areas, it's designed to make it difficult to be cutting trees that are part of a tree grove, and in particular, the ones that would be on the edge of these upland areas that are adjacent to the riparian zones, figure out a way to stay out of them. And then we've got, you may have noticed in the habitat conservation area section, we have a section for relaxing some of the dimensional standards to make it easier to kind of move your units around and keep them out of the trees and the root zones and so forth.
Density transfer.
Pardon?
Density transfer.
Well, sort of, except since we don't have a density maximum, that's not really a problem. So we've removed that one issue, then it's almost more physically, how do we get these units arranged and meet the other standards to avoid the trees, but the density, anything, anywhere, which, will make that easier to overcome. Then there's, say, for example, some of our other zones right now, along the floodplain and so forth. Well, then they had to do certain things certain ways. They had a minimum and a maximum density. So then it was, well, how do you? That goes away with this.
Along the lines with trees, and then that park that's in the, I think it's in the rural character neighborhood, that's right along the river. Like, what is a park? Is it cutting down those trees and making a green space, or will that park remain wooded? Does that need to be there? I mean, because it's like, that's a big grove of trees. Do we want people?
It's just depending on what it's, so I think you could have, any of those. I mean, there's plenty of examples of parks that really have just walking trails going through them. Bryan State Park off of Terwilliger, for example, all wooded, and the only recreation is walking around.
And do we have jurisdiction to say, you know, these trees should stay because it's, you know, part of the habitat and, you know,
We're gonna
river protection?
later. So if it's in a riparian area, it's gonna be CWS. That calls the shots, really.
It'll be what, that calls the shots?
Clean water service.
Clean water services, okay. So, you know, I'm talking about that big community park that's already there.
Clean water services is doing the regulating, and we as a city are gonna do, like we have so far, if it's a riparian area like along Deer Creek, just call it out, and CWSF, then we're happy.
Okay.
And so that's gonna continue, and it's just that now we are gonna have some additional responsibility for those areas outside of the riparian. To do some things that are gonna be complementary to those. And, so, we will have that ability to restrict what gets cut and so forth. And, you know, like with anything, with tree cutting, it's, some of it's art. As to, you know, are you gonna be able to save this tree or not? And working with an arborist to make sure that you've got some good advice going in. And then sometimes just being creative. So, for example, when, we had a drive-through go in, by Space Age Fuel, we had a drive-through that went around the back. And the developer was, proposing to remove about 6, dead firs along the back, because of that, well, you know, it's in the root zones, blah, 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 and I'm just, there's something about cutting a bunch of trees for a drive-through driveway. I thought, oh, really? So we looked at giving them some ability to make it a little narrower. And then, finally just had a deal where, well, the planter's gonna be on site with the arborists when they start, and we're gonna just start scraping away and see if they hit roots and if we have a problem.
Okay.
Well, even to the surprise of the arborists, we didn't hit any roots, and so
Yes.
we all won.
Not bad back there.
We all won. So, you know, you can do it that way too. You
Yeah.
just have to, but if you, it's mostly if you just stay at it and try to be reasonable and then sometimes you just figure it out in the field.
Okay.
So I'm gonna ask Marcy to chime in really quick on a couple of the other ones. Basically, Mr. Dahlstrom had brought up 5 potential modifications or inclusions into the, code. One was, implementing view sheds in the development for Mount Hood and the Walton River. I think that's something that, I'll let Marcy speak to. The solar requirements seem reasonable, and that seems like an easy enough add to put in there. The reused water, there's a reused water component to, encourage the use of reused water on any sort of landscaping thing. He has a must in there. Must and shall are really strong languages in the planning realm. What I would recommend is where we say, if we were to implement something to that effect, it would have to be where available. So if the purple line is there, or if it's in the vicinity and a reasonable distance, then it should be deployed for landscape purposes by both HOAs and the city. The public notice piece that he's mentioning, this is a cost element as well for the city to consider. Right now, we have it, as you mentioned, from the center of the property. I don't have a problem with that. I might suggest a modest increase to the 250 feet, maybe it's 300 or 350. I wouldn't go all the way out to 1,000 feet, just because then you're hitting the whole city, right? So, I would say take it from the edge of the parcel and maybe a modest increase above the minimum that's required for the ORS. But you're also risking, in doing that, you're risking setting a different standard for the Kingston Terrace area versus the city, which can be confusing for any planners or staff that we have on board. So, consistency in the code, I think, would be beneficial there. Right now, it's 250, which is consistent with ORS, which is basically out there. I'm sure that might get amended at some point in time, but at this point in time, I would just change the language so it says, measure from the edge of the parcel instead of the center of the parcel, right? The bicycle parking element, I agree with what, Mr. Dahlstrom is saying, and I think that's an easy add as well.
Is it visible from the entrance? Is that what, I mean, just so that you feel like your bike is safe? Is that really
I
it?
think that's what he's trying to get at,
Yeah.
because, you know, you go inside, bikes are pretty easy to steal a tire or something to that effect, and then you're stranded. So I think what he's saying is, he's requesting that they be visible up front.
I think it's reasonable, because we're not gonna get people to ride their bikes if they can't see them.
Yeah, 50 feet seems reasonable. Otherwise, I think we're going to have a bike walk in front of every business and bike rack in front of every business, right?
That would be a good thing.
Yeah, that wouldn't be a bad thing.
We don't have parking requirements. For biking.
Yeah,
But I think 50 feet from a primary entrance is
yeah. I'm just thinking if we have a,
office space visible.
what I'm envisioning is a row of businesses along Main Street, right? And then you're going to go in and have, you know, a cup of coffee or what have you, and your bike's all the way down to the corner of the block. You won't have eyes on your bicycle and it eventually grow legs, but, this seems a little different.
Could I ask a question? One thing, particularly in the senior area, you're gonna have people with tricycles, the electric tricycles as well, because they may have balance issues. Will our bicycle racks accommodate, the trike? So, I'm just,
Not particularly.
okay,
I mean, in most cases, you could probably still use the end bike rack because you
okay, all right. It's just a question, speaking as someone who probably gonna be having to do this, because I can't bike anymore. I'm just trying to think ahead. There's other people, I've seen them, I'm starting to see them around King City. That's why I'm asking the question.
Maybe the bike rack could be
Pardon?
made as a T, so that the end one
Yeah.
would accommodate a tricycle, and you
Yeah.
could do regular slots for the.
Yeah,
There's a
Other
provision, says bicycle parking spaces must be at least 2.5 feet in width and 6 feet in length, and have an access aisle between each row of spaces that's at least 5 feet in width.
okay, that should take care of the trike, okay. I'm just trying to think proactively here that,
Same thing with, similar with electric bikes.
Mhm.
And they require our room around the rack. So I think this
okay.
provision should cover.
Well, when I get my trike, I will test it out.
Maybe it could be a little bit like handicap parking, where
Yeah.
the specific end
Slot,
slot is for trike.
yeah.
So, to address the vision clearance issue about parks, the request is that, they're retaining the view sheds, key viewing areas from roads and public use areas, So we do have the health payment procedure. Someone comes in and they're working on the eastern, from Elsner East. They refer to section 3 of the land use section of the master plan or the parks plan. Remember, that has the circle, quarter mile distance within which there must be a park of a certain type, if there's a number of residents. And it goes into quite a lot of specificity in that area. So that's negotiated at the time of agreement, but we don't know where those parks are going to be exactly. But I would propose that this key area be determined at that time once the park is located. And also, GIS could potentially locate those spaces, or they could be physically sited. So I suggest that we add a little bit where it's good, because it's a really do the awareness of the park section.
I think so, yeah. I would think so. Yeah, I would think that we could add it in there.
And it's more about
Even if it's,
building obstruction, but not cutting, we don't have to cut down trees to get the view shed, right? Like,
yeah, no.
it'd be more like you can't obstruct with a building.
Yeah, I think it's how the buildings are sited and
Placing amenities in a park so that you can enjoy that view.
Uh-huh.
A promontory, a
Mhm.
walkway, a little niche off of a walkway for people to appreciate the view. Those things could be built into the park. There's another provision that's already in the code about preserving a certain percentage of, so for houses that face a natural resource area, a certain percentage of the perimeter, the lot needs to be open to the resource area, can't be someone's backyard. So that's another built-in provision that's already in the code. I think the whole area up is to have those views preserved. They may not be views of Mount Hood, yeah, but they would be views of the natural resource area.
And most of our backbone transportation network is designed on a grid, so it's traveling east, west, north, south as it is. I would imagine, because of the way that the east-west network is laid out, that there should be public view sheds along those corridors of like Mount Hood or the Cascade Range. And then on the north-south, you would have the Tualatin River to the south. And so,
Walking down the street, you might feel.
so I would imagine that because of the designs that we've implemented thus far in the King City Transportation System Plan and the Kingston Terrace Master Plan, we've already taken steps to preserve those view sheds, at least in the public spaces, right? Otherwise, I would be concerned that you're going to be restricting people's ability to develop their property. Because what I've seen anyways on like the coast and other areas like that, where like somebody buys an oceanfront lot and they want to build a house on the oceanfront lot, but they're not allowed to build over 15 feet, so they have to like figure out how to build a flat roof and figure out how to build a small cottage, and that's really restricted because the people that bought the land prior to them that live behind them don't want their ocean view obstructed, and it's not really fair to that property owner who paid a premium for the oceanfront but can't build the house that they'd like. So I think there's certain considerations to be taken into effect here.
I could see another problem with this area being that the important view is in the eye of the beholder. It's not just an obvious one, like an oceanfront lot, that, well, obviously you wanna look at the ocean. I mean, Kingston Terrace, well, maybe it's looking down to the river, maybe it's looking out in some other direction, so then, well, which view are you?
Right.
And if the development starts on the far west and works its way east, right, and then the folks over on the far west end of town that are developed first, all of a sudden they like their view of the farm fields and Hood to the east, it could really have an impact on the ability of the East End neighborhood or the central neighborhood or the rural neighborhood to actually develop. So,
Yeah,
maybe we put something in there that those view sheds are from the public corridors,
Yeah.
yeah?
From there.
Is it?
They're from, their,
That's what I want you to do.
certain identified
Fences.
from roads and public use areas, so specifically.
Oh, so it is.
It's not on a lot.
Okay,
It's
so,
not protecting, someone's view on their lot, it's
Okay.
protecting.
The public view shed down the corridor,
yeah, okay.
I would say.
Kind of accomplishing
Okay, I would be concerned if you're telling somebody, like your neighbor, that they can't build the same house you just built, because now you're gonna take their view from, Hood or
Yeah, I
something,
don't
you know?
think we want to get into.
All right,
No, I don't think we do. Okay.
That says, this suggests that the notification rule be much more clear about where you're counting. This is notification for neighboring
Yeah.
neighbors.
Yeah.
The 250 feet may not be adequate. Some developers use the center of the proposed property, which is the opposite intent rather than the edge of the property. And in an area here where we have such large properties, so, you know, that would not meet the intent. So I think this is something we want to include, to define that the notification measurement is measured from the perimeter of the lot, not the center of the lot.
so that's why it's been done
Okay.
consistently, so
Okay.
That's already that way.
maybe we can clarify it if you look at the code, but that's the way it's always been done, so.
I usually go over any pictures, I don't miss anybody,
Right.
but,
So those are all of them.
so I think the staff is in concurrence that these are definitely doable with some minor modifications, if that's something the commission is in favor of.
How do we do that? Do we make a
It
motion?
would be, at the end.
Okay. To consider these amendments, okay.
I have a couple questions.
That'll be fair. So before we continue our discussion here, shall we close the public hearing? Or
Yes,
discuss within the public
I
hearing?
believe the proper, course here is hearing no testimony,
Mhm.
then close the public testimony on this matter, at this time.
Okay.
So you need a motion, a second, deliberation, and then.
I move that we,
One second, do you want to provide any testimony? I know that we cut you off in the context of the public hearing.
Oh, I have a couple suggestions to.
I think you have to kind of give us all your information and approach. Is that appropriate for him to do that at this time?
We can do that before you close it.
Yeah, before you close.
What do you need from me first?
Your name and your address.
My name is George Brant. I'm a Master Urban Regional Planning graduate from Portland State University. I am at 11651 Southwest Penn Court, Tigard. About a 10-year resident of the area. I'm on the Tigard Planning Commission, so I'm familiar with what's going on in King City, the urban growth boundary transfer, and a lot of the things we're talking about. That's my interest in coming today. Also, in full disclosure, I am one of the applicants for the associate planner position. So we were talking about a couple of things that are very, very important. In terms of electric vehicle charging infrastructure, so if you wait till after an apartment or house is built, and then you want to put the conduit, it can run upwards of $20,000 a parking spot. If you do it pre, it's about $1,200 a parking spot, just to run the conduit and have it ready. So, the Portland Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, under Ingrid Fish, have put together the EV Ready Code project. So I would recommend to the city staff and to the planning commission that you get a hold of that and look at what provisions they have, because it might be easy to adopt language that's germane to King City. The other thing is, when it comes to your tree inventory, Portland State University has a street tree program where they have a specific index of every single street tree in Portland, including when it's been maintained, pruned, et cetera. And that's a volunteer effort. So that might be something to look into if that's really important, preserving especially century trees, oak trees, and big old evergreens. And then the third thing, when it comes to bike parking, this is what I'm really interested in is active transportation. One idea is bike corrals. So that's basically a parking spot that now has bicycle parking infrastructure, so bike staples or posts, whatever, that would accommodate trikes, quads, and larger e-bikes and cargo bikes. Because we can't necessarily drag 2 or 3 e-bikes or cargo bikes in the sidewalk in front of a store or business, right? Because then you have pedestrian access. So that would be my suggestion. These are some considerations for the city and for the planning commission. EV Ready Code Project in Portland, PSU's tree inventory, and taking a parking spot and making it into a bike corral. And I would recommend that be in front of a business that has heavy foot traffic for the concern of people wanting their bike stolen or accessories, like lights and stuff like that. Because no one wants to bring all that stuff in with you. So thank you for your time. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. And then as we have no other testimony, at this time, I would like to ask for a motion to close or continue the public hearing.
I move that we close the public testimony section of the hearing.
I have second.
Roll call for everybody who says aye.
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 A show of hands would be great.
Aye.
5-0.
Okay, so then I declare this public hearing closed on July 27th at, we're going to go with 10:54 a.m. Okay, so then at this time, we'll have discussion related to our recommendation to City Council. Gretchen, you have been so patient.
Well, when I was in Tigard, we would be able to ask questions of staff before we had public testimony, because sometimes it obviated some of the questions that people had in public testimony, but that's okay. Okay, I just want to verify again for the members of the public, we don't create minimum densities here in King City. This is set by state and metro rules. Am I correct, Mr. Leiden?
Well, it's also set by the conditions of approval, bringing the urban growth boundary.
Yes.
We're obligated to have at least 3,300 units.
So I just wanted.
That's one reason we have to have minimum density, because we have
Yeah.
that.
I understand. I just want to make sure that those who are here don't think this is just King City's idea. Okay. When I was reading the code, I didn't see any specific provisions, and maybe I just missed it, for planned unit development. Because sometimes, for example, Tigard has a whole area in its code for planned unit, and it seems to me that's going to be possibly an event that's going to be happening out in that area.
Can you define what that means? Keith?
Yeah, I guess I'd say there that regulating plan sees the plan development. So if you're going to have all sorts of flexibility. You just need to show how you're going to meet the regulating plan, which really just provides an outline. And a lot of it is, here's your minimum density that you have to have in your neighborhood. And just show us how you want to meet that, and so you can mix and match as you would like, as long as you can meet some of those requirements. I don't know if you have anything else.
Planned unit development was created because many developers wanted to do a mix of housing types or different kinds of streets than were permitted by the base zone. But we've kind of gone beyond, since the middle housing rule was adopted by all the cities that are required to adopt it. We're sort of entered this new period where you can do a mix of housing types.
So you're not going to need planned unit development. Okay, yep. Something that I've worked with for the last 40-plus years in therapist, so.
Definitely, we're in like a new era of planned development is by right.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yeah, I think it would be fair to say that in a lot of respects, for Kingston Terrace, this approach that I described in the presentation is much more flexible right out of the gate, as opposed to our traditional zoning in the rest of King City, where it prescribes, here's your minimum, here's your maximum, a narrow range of housing types, and lot size and all that stuff. And so then the plan development was, well, if I wanna change this a little bit or mix this a little bit, how do I do that? Because the normal process is kind of a straitjacket, I can only do it this way. So in this case, we've gone away from that, and so you could almost think of the regulating plan as saying that everything's plan development.
But how are we going to encourage that housing mix from, all the way from manufactured homes to single standalone homes within or 8 blocks within a neighborhood? How are we going to make sure that that actually happens? Because it seems like if you just drive around, that you kind of sort of segregates itself the way it is now. You have apartments in one area, condos in another, single family someplace else, and manufactured homes somewhere else. So how are we going to mix all this up?
So I think what you're gonna find is in the code itself, depending on what the neighborhood is, you know, you have in the, rural characteristics neighborhood, a minimum lot size of 2,500 square feet, but you also have a minimum density of 13 units per acre, right? So when you're trying to put all that into a lot that's say an acre wide, and you divide 43,560 by 2,500, you're gonna find it's gonna be tight. And so I think that's going to automatically force some folks to, and there's also space for natural areas or areas that are on the fringe, that's gonna require a percentage of open space, which is gonna further constrain that developable footprint, which is then gonna promote that multifamily. So you're gonna get a mix of single family and multifamily. It's going to essentially force the hand to combine and mix those uses. And not to mention, right now, with the housing crunch that's there and the modifications that were adopted as a function of House Bill 2001 and 2003, there's also more opportunity now for developers to get creative and build more density into lots than what are originally prescribed. So I think to answer your question, the developers are gonna be hard pressed to do your stereotypical single-family dwelling subdivision only. They're gonna be doing just an only.
I have one more question, Keith. In the old days, vertical triplex, duplexes and triplexes were not generally excited. People weren't excited about doing that in planning staff. Is that going to be available now that you can? I'm just trying to think creatively. You know, again, to get your density, yeah, you want to do multifamily, but if you've got a constrained lot, are we going to be looking at that kind of development? Not your standard apartment. I'm talking about doing a duplex, triplex kind of thing on a lot.
Take a crack on our
Yeah.
too, but, first of all, you can have these as either attached on the same lot, they can be detached. You could, so maybe you have a duplex and,
Well, I know what an ADR is.
yeah, you can do a number of different things. We have height requirements that are very generous, so you could go vertically. So I think it might be more of a market and perhaps building code driven decision rather than,
Yeah, I guess that's kind of where I was going with the building code,
Yeah,
because you don't have to have an elevator until you go to 4 stories.
I think you will see, more duplexes and triplexes. And they can, like, the heights are generous in most areas. So you probably see some vertical stacking of these heights, but then side by side,
Mhm.
is sort of more,
Mhm.
has been more typical.
Right.
There'll be more kind of like the old style duplexes and triplexes, you know, where you had a stair or stairs.
Yep. Yep.
But, and I also wanted to just also double onto what you were saying, Mike, about the variety. I think it will have something to do with the size of the development. So if you have a 1 acre site, someone may come in with all the same units on that site. But that'll just be 1 acre, and then the next next development over, I think you'll see another, housing type or a mix of housing types. And I do think some developers will eagerly do a mix of housing types, and some developers might just do one. So it's possible you'll see some developments at a little monoculture, but they'll be relatively limited because it's just one development. We ought to be, clear, we don't have any requirement for a mix within the development.
Is there an incentive? Well, you have a requirement, you have to get X number of units
The
in.
incentive is the density, and then the carrot is the flexibility.
Yeah.
And I think we'll be, by offering both of those things, you actually might see some of the most creative developers coming in here.
I look at all of the other development, you know, and it looks like it's the same thing as far as my eye can see as I'm driving out.
Well, if you look at the new King City development, like up for 131st, you know, a couple blocks over, there is a mix there.
Yeah.
You know, there are the quadplex and then the single family, and so there's actually, it's happening right now. And it looks, it's pleasing.
Another thing is that
There's
development,
just so much of,
the one thing, there's so much of the one thing.
Yeah. I think we're gonna be seeing a lot more row houses and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
This is a new way of having a zoning code. I think you'll see a variety of the results. And I think more people might be doing what the development that the two of you were talking about. And I think there's a lot of pressure to build a single dwelling, what we call a single dwelling house, single family house. That's because, that's kind of what everybody wants. Every home builder wants to build is the single family dwelling, because that's what they've always built. And that's
house
what
in
they
the
know
suburbs,
how to do.
yeah.
And that's what the zoning law requires them to do. So we're kind of entering this new phase where it's possible to see many more types of housing. But there may still be that pressure, the market pressure to do the single dwelling. But to meet the minimum density, you'll have to do a couple of other types on the same lot.
Yeah.
That, I think, can pressure the development into more variety.
I mean, you had that with my Steve Brown example in the apartments.
Mhm.
He didn't really want to do it, but then did it and did a good job, and, who knows, maybe he's done some more like that now.
Yeah.
Just for clarity purposes, like, I just did the math exactly, 1,500 square foot lot, which is what we have, and the minimum in the East Bend and the town center area, you can get about 29 units per acre. And that's 29 parcels, and on those parcels, you can have, single family, duplex, triplex, quadplex, right? And then in the rural area, we had a minimum lot size of 2,500, and that breaks down to essentially 17 units, or 17 parcels per acre. And again, you could have the same situation with a single family dwelling, a duplex, triplex, quadplex. What I think Keith and I are trying to say is, like, if somebody wants to do larger lots, like, they want to get that, you know, the 5,000, square foot lot with the 3,000 square foot home, then what happens is that takes up some of that land, and then it promotes the density into a tighter area that they would have to do a multifamily on, that would then end up being like an apartment. And that's what Mr. Brown did over off of 131st Street. He wanted to do the larger lot, build the larger homes, but that condensed his density, and then he had to build a multifamily up front to meet the density provision.
Okay.
Mhm.
There's 20, but it's-
Gosh, I'm not even sure I know where that is.
Exactly, that's right.
Yeah, it blends right into the neighborhood. It really does. I mean, we walk all over that place, and it's very beautiful.
Yeah, because of course, he didn't want to put up something in front that was gonna be a detriment to his single family.
No, it's very nice.
It is well done.
So on the
It's-
west
it's-
side of
it's-
131st?
Mhm.
I'll have to go look.
It's nice
Yeah,
to
it's
walk
about
around.
the same scale as the Highland stuff that's on the
Okay,
west
yeah.
side, so.
Yeah.
Can I ask some questions about the exhibit, I think it'd be, one is about the quorum. It actually says in here, like, 3. You didn't change it.
Yeah,
Yes.
I know that needs to
Okay,
change.
that will change. Okay, that was one of my
So
questions.
that's what I was talking about, needs to change.
That still needs to
was
change.
not addressed in here, so that was one of the things that,
Okay,
it does need to modify to be a majority of the seating, the majority of the sitting members of the planning commission.
I like that better. And then the burning, like, typically if you're gonna burn, you need a permit, except if you have a hole in the ground and it may or may not be on your property.
No, so this is how this works in accordance with TVFNR, is it basically uses the TVFNR, code. And so if you're going to burn, then you need a spark arrestor, and it has to be in an outdoor fire pit, right? So it allows you to have your, backyard fire pit,
Yeah,
if you will, but you have to have a spark arrestor over the top.
it doesn't say that though. It says this is a hole in bare earth.
Where is,
On 8.08.02, permit required and exempt from permitting is you can burn clean, dry firewood in a hole in bare earth,
which one is that now?
it's B.
Just about the camping.
Mhm.
Oh, just using an example. Right.
But then I feel like then I can go like, because it's like it could be, you have to be permitted if it's on your own property or cause to be initiated on the property of another, except you're exempt if you want to just burn in a bare earth hole. Can we get a 6 strike?
So this is straight out of TVFNR code, so what I try to do is make it in line with what they're doing, and this is their code language, and I think what they're talking about is like, if it's an earthen hole where the fire can't get out. And so what you see this typically is, are you familiar with like, a barbacoa or Mexican barbecue or something like that,
Yeah.
where they put the pig in the ground and they put the coals and put the pig in the
Okay, so that would be permissible, but you don't need a permit and it doesn't necessarily be on your property.
Yeah.
It doesn't, okay.
You have to share the pig.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd forgotten even that you can do that.
So I think
Okay.
the key here is that it's confined.
Yeah.
Fire has to be confined in a non-combustible area.
Maybe it needs to say something about it being on your property, because I think if the permit's required, if it's on your own property, but then exempt from permitting, it's kind of like, well, you can do this anywhere then. I don't know. I feel like it's missing something to kind of say you can't go dig a hole under the power lines and,
Or in the park.
or in the park, or, you know, public land, or non-private property, or something like that.
So usually we should just add something, maybe we could,
Exempt from permitting if it occurs on your private property, or something like that, your own property.
I guess I sort of implied, as I was read it.
I didn't imply it. I was like, oh, this seems like it could go do it
Yeah.
anywhere.
okay,
Dig a
Yeah,
hole.
sometimes you have to
so,
not refer.
I think there's required.
I mean, I don't know if you need a permit right now, but
All right.
just kind of think through, like, how do you it needs to be on your own property.
On the one above that, it says maintained on their own property, right?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, we'll make it consistent.
We permit it if it's on your own property
Right.
or property of another, but then exempting all this other stuff without defining where it may occur.
If it's on your own house, your own property.
Exempt from permitting,
Yeah,
if occurs on your own property or something like that. Okay, and then.
they can wordsmith it.
And then, there was a comment made at the city council meeting about the noise, and perhaps not just using a decibel, but looking to the surrounding communities and kind of having knowledge about what their noise ordinance is, and I'm just curious, are we, similar, to what those surrounding communities are?
Yeah, the numbers that we took were straight from, the combination of Beaverton,
Okay.
Wallace, and Tigard, and Portland.
So it kind of just levels the playing field for noise. Okay, I think that's just a point of clarification.
We basically took them from those cities and,
Do the police have the authority based on these noise codes to address the fireworks issue. I've raised that more than once.
I think those fireworks are, their own little, that's their own
Well,
system.
I
that
think we
happens
need-
once a year,
I
so.
think we need to tighten it up. Well, it happens at New Year's as well.
Are you asking about applying a noise ordinance to fireworks? Because obviously fireworks are going to
Well-
exceed any noise ordinance, right?
But fireworks that are legal are only, that make the noise, are only at official sites, not people doing them in the street or in their yards.
I would say even the fountains are noisy, they're gonna exceed the decibel range that's even in here.
So with Lindsay,
Yeah, I mean, any of the fountains.
That I'm not worried about. I'm talking about
I don't know if
the
we want,
the big scale fireworks that
we
we're
want to get
bringing
into
from
regulation
Canada.
in this jurisdiction on fireworks, and I don't know if that
Well,
belongs
they're
here.
illegal fireworks.
I know they're illegal. That's the
Yeah.
point. I'm not sure the police feel they have sufficient,
It's not that.
If it goes above certain feet, the police officers have a state authority.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's not that. The problem is that everybody in the entire nation is doing it, and we only have like 1 or 2 cops. So it would, I mean, they could be chasing these things all over the place. If they don't see them lighted off, they can't give them the ticket, right? So they have to be at the site
yeah.
when it happened, visually identifying
Individual.
the violation in order to write them the ticket for it happening. And usually what happens is as the police are coming down the street, everyone's running out, hiding their stuff, so,
Well,
without,
when I lived up on Bull Mountain, I had a neighbor who would bring them in. I mean, these are the types that went up, 200 feet in the air. I mean, they were full-fledged fireworks. And, I called the police and I took pictures of what they were doing, and they caught roofs on fire. I mean, it's a serious issue, and I have seen them here out in Fisher Road, and I heard them on 4th of July somewhere to the west. So I didn't go out there and look, but it's scaring the animals. And, I mean, I think all of us have animals that have been frightened, and they start fires. So I just want to make sure we've given everybody enough authority to get out there, and if citizens are seeing it themselves and taking pictures, that should be enough to get attention.
I'm sure they have the authority, it's just a game of whack-a-mole while you're out there chasing them down, and so it's a lot of resources, a lot of stuff that.
Well, I'm just talking right here in our community, so.
as far as noise, I mean, construction is noisy, and there will be construction. And it probably will exceed our decibel levels. What is can we lay out a process for an application? I remember we had to approve the noise for the bridge.
So there are certain exceptions that are written into the code just underneath that talk about, construction, mowing lawns, things of that nature that can transpire between the hours of,
Okay.
7 a.m. and 7 p.m. Those elements are still in there, still
Okay.
allowable and still provided a certain exception. So those are still,
Okay.
still in the code. So they can still do those activities. The problem with the way that the code was written is like just talking would have exceeded those decibel levels. So if your neighbor who's living next door is on their back porch having a conversation, and you're on your back porch also outside, they could technically say that you're violating their, right of enjoyment to their back porch because they can hear you whispering next door.
Oh, well,
Right.
So that's why we changed the decibel levels to make it reasonable, so that, we can have a conversation on our side that's not really interfering with the conversation.
so it gets worse when you are developing more densely. People are talking, we are very dense here in Old King City, and people are talking next door, across the street, and I hear it in my backyard. It's just because it's echoing off of the buildings.
Right.
Yeah, I think, you know, a big reason for this is, my husband turns the radio on in the backyard when he's working, and so he turns it up because he's pounding nails, and I'm like, honey, got headphones, you know? And I think that's a big reason for this. I don't think it's people talking to each other necessarily. Even though I did have, my neighbors used to get together in their driveway across the street from about 7 to 9, and it was really loud. I asked them to turn it down, and I became the pariah of the neighborhood.
Yes,
Um,
the Wicked Witch, yes.
I have other questions, if you're good.
Oh, I'm sorry,
Questions?
yes.
No, you don't have, you know, you get yours over, because mine will go on forever. I really think that we need to beef up the, both the trees and the, landscaping, because we are right next to the Tualatin River. Water carries invasive species downstream. We have lots and lots of, Norway maples are invasive. The laurels are invasive. Portland's landscaping code is a pain in the butt because they say you can't plant certain things that I know aren't invasive because they're cultivars. But I think it's really important to beef it up and put in prohibited trees, prohibited plants, and also have landscaping. The landscaping standards are very vague from what I've read. I kind of looked for them and they were 2 sentences. Some jurisdictions are unreasonable, but I think we should have more minimum landscaping standards. I also noticed, and I'm sorry, I looked at the old version, before the new version came out. In 16.124.140, number 6, which is in red in the old version, conflicts with the criteria for trees and parking areas. There's a 20-foot and a 30-foot difference here, 20 being in numerals and 30 being written out. I personally think 30 is good, otherwise going to end up with little tiny Japanese cherry trees, you know.
Oh, this is the spacing between 3 trees?
No, this is actually mature height of. In parking and loading zones, and deciduous shade trees shall meet the following criteria.
Carol?
It says 16.124.130 height restriction. 16.124.140 parking and loading areas.
Yeah, and then down into B.
4 trees shall be planted in parking islands and parking areas at ratio 1 tree per every 10 contiguous parking spaces.
Yeah, so I'm looking at 140 is number 6, and then B.
The area for trees and parking areas.
Yeah.
Carol, before we get on, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
With respect to the plants and invasive, the state of Oregon has adopted a list of plants and trees that they suggest are nuisance and should not be put in garden. Would it be helpful to put in the code just a reference to the state list so developers could get to that list easily?
So, yeah, I mean, it would be nice to have a list of trees. We just don't have one yet.
No, but this also is not just trees, it's shrubs, it's large shrubs and such are,
This particular section is talking about trees, and what it says is that criteria for trees in parking areas, deciduous shade trees, I cannot talk today, shall meet the following criteria. They have to reach a mature height of 30 feet or more. They have to cast moderate or dense shade in the summer, be long-lived, over 60 years, do do well in an urban environment by being pollution tolerant and tolerant of direct and reflected heat, require little maintenance, mechanically strong, insect and disease resistant, and require little pruning.
Mhm.
Be resistant to drought conditions and be barren of fruit production. So these are for trees and parking areas. So it's particular to those trees.
Okay.
But, like, when we talk about trees for the city, I think both myself and Keith have looked at and talked about developing a tree ordinance and having a list of recognized, citywide trees for planting in the street right-of-ways and things of that nature, so that sometimes we can, have a common theme, and also try to prevent those, is it ash trees that we had over here in Edgewater that blew over? Yeah, so we had all these ash trees, and the first wind that came by, it blew them all over, right? And not to mention, we have the emerald green ash borer coming our way, and so if we don't prepare and we just plant a bunch of ash trees, we could find ourselves with a bunch of dead ash trees.
Right, yeah.
So, finding ulterior plans to do that is something that we've been looking at, but we've been so focused on trying to get these projects through that we haven't had time to really do some of the fun stuff that we want to do, but that's
I
definitely
can,
on our list.
I have lots of references for that. But I would like to, make sure that in that ordinance, number 6 matches by saying 30 feet rather than 20 feet. The height is also a shade factor as well as, canopy spread. We may need to, clarify canopy and shade, because the Albertsons parking lot has, columnar maples that, are very, very popular in the industry, to plant, and, they don't give you any shade. They give you narrow shade. They thrive, but they don't do the job. So I can send you some references on invasives and trees. A couple of other things. I was just going through the, not the code, but what was written before the code. And we talked about there aren't any schools, this is my soapbox, planned in our area, but there are in Tigard. And, do we have a guarantee to those schools? I'd really like to make sure that there is an agreement, within the Tigard-Tualatin School District, because King City is being, I want to say it's being treated like a second-class city because we aren't Tigard, so we can't go to Tigard. And I don't know how our areas are,
Are you talking about the new elementary school that's going in?
I don't know.
And there is,
Yeah, it's already
Something
in
like that.
process.
But, and this might be something more for the, school district, but, I'm still pissed off that I had to put in so many miles to get my daughters to and from Tualatin and had to buy a car.
that's,
And that's the last thing that we want to, encourage our kids to do.
the city has no real say over how they want to
Okay.
do their attendance boundaries, that's their deal.
Okay,
We have, just so you know, we have been talking with Tigard 12 School District throughout this process, concept plan, master plan, about their needs for possible school site here in Paris. And they have not given us any definitive, direction, which frankly surprised me because that population for one elementary school, so I would have thought they'd want
yeah,
like they have, but all we can do is coordinate with them, but what they want to do with their planning and where they want to put the school is up to the district.
okay. And I guess this is for the next discussion. I don't think we can write it into the code because it's a building code sort of thing. But I really would like to find some incentives for green building, sustainable building. And I'm talking about things like, a lot of buildings are built with the assumption that there will be air conditioning. They're designed with the assumption that there will be air conditioning, and then they don't have air conditioning, and you're stuck in a hot box. And so I don't know how this could happen as an incentive or a condition of approval. Actually having ventilation diagrams within a building, so that if a building is not air conditioned, and it doesn't have to be air conditioned, you can see the ventilation, the draft, and things like that in the building. And that, in that case, my daughter lives in a place that has actually very good ventilation, but she can't open her door because she lives in Portland, in the city, and she can't just leave her door open. Having first floor security measures, meaning a screen door that would lock. She had a screen door that would lock, and she could have ventilation coming up her stairs and then out her windows. And right now, she has cross ventilation, and it wasn't bad in the 90-degree weather we had. Anybody have any ideas? Is this in, because if we had the incentives, then we wouldn't get the money that we needed for the roads and things like that, if it's a financial incentive. Or I'm trying to think of how to deal with it.
It's probably mostly market incentive, isn't it?
What's that?
It's mostly market incentive.
Yeah, but there's certain things that you could do. I mean, off the top of my head, I was thinking like, you know, you could promote green roofs, solar panels, you could promote rooftop access, you could promote other things of this nature where there's, opportunity. Like, I think green roofs provide an opportunity to kind of help with climate change. I think, solar panels provide an opportunity to preserve electricity and use sustainable systems. Electricity infrastructure to the house is something I think that needs to be addressed through the building code, but having additional conduit there so that it can actually happen, or that's probably building code, but through land use code, I mean, things that we could potentially do would be solar access, tree preservation, green roof, solar.
There's some things we can do. So we have some solar access provisions in the code right now. But they're exempt if the lot sizes are less than 4,000 square feet, applies to individuals. So for the most part, it hasn't really applied because lot sizes have gotten smaller. My feeling is that those provisions of the code more or less become obsolete, but there could be some parts of it that we want to keep as part of some building or development design criteria.
Okay.
But, I mean, this project in itself, what we're just doing now, has been huge. And so now you're talking about, well, how about these other amendments and things that we could stack on top of? So right now, we're just trying to get this thing pushed through.
Okay.
Thinking, I think a couple things. One is, as hard as you try, you're gonna find that there's some things in this code amendment package that aren't gonna work as well as you thought they were, or, you know, once you get into the nitty-gritty about how you implement it, you realize this isn't quite working. So we're gonna probably come back with some code amendments to just fix some things that turned out to be glitches. We also have a number of other things code related that we have in the existing code now that we'd like to change. And so I think maybe we could work with the planning commission after we get this done and figure out what that list might look like and then decide on other amendment packages. But, we're right up to our eyeballs right now, just trying to get this part.
Need to get that new planner hired.
So then does it make sense then for us to kind of have a motion to say, well, what we've got now, let's make a recommendation about, and then knowing that there will be further discussions about what, other amendments should be made in the future?
As in we know about other amendments, but we will table the discussion about those until we get through with this.
Well, and before you make that motion.
No, I'm making a point of clarification.
Yeah, I think, Marcia would like to just point out a few things, because they did a lot of work on the code. And there's a lot of stuff in the regulations and everything else, they really addressed a lot of these issues.
I just want to acknowledge what you're saying, Commissioner Fellows, about true ventilation and the design of a secure front door area. And, I think that's really important in housing.
Yeah.
And I would suggest that, and a lot of those designs are old-fashioned things, like having a window above the door. You don't even need a screen door necessarily, but a transom window that can actually allow you to have cross ventilation. Middle housing types tend to lend themselves to cross ventilation more than an apartment building, like a double-loaded corridor would. But it's difficult to build that into the code. You have to have clear and objective standards for housing. But I would suggest that maybe you add this, you consider adding this to the list of things that you'd like to see later. Maybe a guidebook, about this kind of, the importance of this design in housing and examples where it's been done this way. Would be helpful, along with the tree, the street tree list that you're gonna work on soon. So it might go onto the menu of action items to be undertaken after you adopt this.
But there are some things that we can just implement that we've talked about already, that are part of the plan that we already have, or just require a small modification to the code language that we for this.
That you could bring back in relatively short order.
Those,
I use the word relatively.
Yeah, so I think that there,
Sure.
yeah, I think that there are some items that are not part of this code package that we can bring back at another time to address, such as the street tree, such as, sustainable building incentives that aren't included, like the rooftop access or green roofs or, those sorts of things. We can bring those back as kind of full pet projects that we try to implement citywide. I think for what we have here today, there are certain modifications or amendments that can be taken under consideration or advisement by the planning commission as a function of a recommendation to the city council, and we can try to roll those into the document that we present to the city council. And I think that the 5 things that Mr. Dahlstrom has pointed out, I think most of those seem reasonable, with some minor modifications that we can kind of tweak and address, because it's a plug and play.
Yep.
We don't have to come up with a whole new.
Well, that's kind of what I would suggest. For example, Mike Dahlstrom's suggestions, could those be coming back to us in relative, or do
we need them to, is the
do we need
question.
to see them?
Because I think we can say, we have the language, we
Yeah.
can just put it in there, and
Yeah.
we can agree with that.
Yeah,
I don't think we need to see them before it goes before the city
Okay.
council.
Exactly, that's
Yeah.
what I'm saying, it's like, we just roll them in as a function of, condition of approval, or a recommendation of approval to the city council. City
Okay.
council can then review those amendments at the city council hearing in September, I wanna say. And then at that point in time, it can be either rolled in, captured, or adopted, but if there's anything else that, the planning commission wants to roll in or is considering, we can also roll those in as recommendation to consider.
Sure.
And that would give our staff at least a month or so to try to figure out ways of incorporating them or crafting that language. But what I don't wanna do is craft new language that hasn't been reviewed or the public hasn't had an opportunity to comment on. We've already had Mr. Dahlstrom's comments for a month already. We're having this public testimony now. If we incorporate this, it's already been out there for a month or so. So the public has had an opportunity chime in and weigh in there. Start creating new language that hasn't been introduced, well, that's when we get into a situation where the public
Yeah.
didn't necessarily have a full and equal opportunity to comment or
Agreed.
weigh in on something.
Not to mention,
Yeah, not to mention our agency partners with Department of Land Conservation, Department of State Lands, Metro, and everybody else. So I want to be very cautious on how many amendments and how many changes we incorporate at this stage, when we can come back with minor amendments later.
I think that's a better course of
Yeah.
action.
No, I have the impression that some of what we're talking about is almost building code specific rather than development
Exactly, yeah.
specific.
And that's why we're addressing
You know,
it.
in my mind, I'm sort of going, there should be a building code about healthy interior environment, which is what I
Right.
think.
But probably outside of our discussion today.
Yeah.
And it's kind of outside our purview, to be honest. It's
Yeah.
not something that we regulate.
One thing that, and I apologize, we talked a lot about residential, but we have not talked about the commercial core. And, you know, are we going to allow single-use, business buildings? Under what circumstances would we or would we not? So we don't end up with a bunch of little bank buildings, because our commercial and business should be just as dense as our residential. We want people going to one place, and it's not addressed that I have seen really in our code.
I think it's addressed, and I'll let Marcy pitch in too if she wants.
Okay.
But I think our code addresses that in two ways. One is we allow for and encourage mixed use, commercial and residential uses. Then the minimum density requirement is going to still be nudging developers definitely to have something more than just a one-story commercial building with nothing on top.
Okay.
And they'll have to try and figure out where they're gonna put the rest of that.
Oh, so our density goes all the way into the commercial area?
It would be for the entire neighborhood. So
Okay.
you have to figure out how you're gonna get so the regulated plan shows how many units are expected from each neighborhood.
Okay, great.
So you do have this mix of uses, particularly in town centers, it's allowed,
Uh-huh.
but they still need to meet that minimum residential part. So that's gonna really encourage mixed use, ground floor retail with something open.
Okay, got it, okay.
And they have to find a way to put those units.
Carol, when we visualized the concept plan back when I was on the council, it was intended that the vast majority of the central business area would be 3 stories, 1 story of, the first floor would be commercial, and then there'd be 2 floors of residential on top.
Okay, all right, okay, good. That makes me happy.
Can I add to that, we do allow small commercial entities within the neighborhood, east of the neighborhood, east of the town center, but the same provisions apply that Keith just mentioned. You could have a little corner store, but you still have to meet the minimum density height for the neighborhood, which means you probably wouldn't build a single-story retail building. You have a little corner store.
Yeah,
It's possible you could do a little pop-out, like you might see some of these more old-fashioned neighborhood store designs where there's a house in the back of the lot and a little store on the front.
yeah, that's what you're envisioning, okay. And I just don't want Bank of America to have their building and Wells Fargo to have their building, and you know how that goes.
We do, but they don't have to meet the criteria.
Yeah, so I think all the banks are gonna have residential above them.
Solid foundation.
Well, you know what I mean.
All right. So any further discussion related to our recommendation? Anyone wish to make a recommendation at this time?
I would like to, move approval of, what's our number here?
review 2023-04.
2304.
Anyone like to second that? I will second the approval. Any discussion regarding this?
I think that we need to clarify that we have, moved for approval with the condition that we, work on landscaping code, tree code, what else? You know, that we have, certain things that we will make projects.
Or does that belong here? Because I mean, I think that would be a separate topic almost.
Some of it is, I think what we need to do is, we have a motion and second on the table right now. I think that we also had the 5 items.
With the 5
that
items.
Mr.
Mhm.
Dahlstrom had
Yes.
recommended, so I think
All right,
the motion.
Want to amend
I
your
will
motion?
amend my motion to include the 5 items that we discussed with respect to Mr. Dahlstrom's suggestions. Was there anything else that I should add?
I don't know at this time, but what Commissioner Bellows is talking about is something that we can add to our list, in developing a street tree list.
I think before you get to that, the other item would be the memo that you got from the staff on just those minor
Right.
amendments.
Okay, plus the minor amendments that were outlined in Mr. Leiden's July 26th
Staff report.
memo to the Planning Commission.
Okay, and then there was also the planning commission forum.
Quorum.
And the
making sure that
Planning
that's
Commission
corrected.
quorum correction.
And then maybe some clarification about burning holes in the ground
Yes,
and where that can happen.
yes.
And then,
The amendment to the
clarity
burning provision.
to,
I think we might have too many things in this
No,
motion.
no.
No?
You know, these are all the things we talked
These are
about.
all the little amendments to what we were presented. Okay. Did I get them all?
I think that's it.
All right,
My
so
second.
I have amended my motion. Do you want to amend your second?
My second will stand with the added provisions.
Okay.
okay, so I'm just gonna go over this,
Okay.
so we know.
So I made the amendment, I amended my initial motion.
So we had a motion and a second,
Discussion.
Commissioner Boehner moved to approve land use, file 2304. It was seconded by Councilor Paulson to recommend approval. It was then amended by Commissioner Boehner to include the 5 items amendments, to include the 5 items brought to our attention by Mr. Dahlstrom, which included view sheds for Mount Hood and Tualatin River through public, right of ways and parks, solar requirements such as, solar panel, use of reused water where available, public notices from the edge of the parcel, and bicycle parking, within 50 feet. Is that still sufficient, or do we want to try to, no bicycle, so there's 4. So we keep the bicycle
Okay.
parking, but amend the other 4 items. So there's 4 items with,
Except we also got the comment about, what was it, corralling?
Bike corral.
Bike corral.
that's kind of what the regulatory plan has in mind by
Okay.
having the bike parking within 50 feet.
Okay,
Elevated, so there'd be like 1 spot.
all right.
I thought we're kind of backing away from solar panels when we were having discussion.
No, it's,
Solar panel piece is something that we can put as a function of the land use, but it's not something that we regulate until building code.
Okay.
So I think that's why we're saying that's probably something for building code piece. But it is something that I think we could implement relatively easily.
It's not a condition of, not one of the Mike Dahlstrom items that we would incorporate by the city council hearing.
It would be, yeah. So he's saying a recommendation modification to 16.114.080, where family solar, or elevated connecting panels. It's something that we have,
No.
but it's something that's in our master.
And so that's, well, I know that's a pretty specific thing.
So then should we table that portion
Should that
for
one, be-
further discussion?
should that be deferred to, for staff review?
So then it will just be the,
3 items.
yeah.
Okay.
I believe in, using solar panels, but I think it should go in.
By power from PG.
I don't have an objection, it's just, do it. Now,
So I ran out of my storage.
I'd love to see a solar panels, in an open field area that's
So,
not being
and
used.
this is a clarity piece, I would just remind the planning commission that this is a recommendation to the
Right.
council.
Yeah.
And that should give us adequate time to review and
Okay,
bounce off. So if the planning commission still wants to recommend the solar panels, we could still move forward with that, and then that provides staff an opportunity to review.
before it's gonna go to city
And
council.
then
Yeah.
it would be a recommendation that we present to the city council from you, the planning commission.
Yeah, I like that.
I think that makes perfect
Okay,
that
sense.
makes
it's not necessarily in there,
Yeah.
but it's a recommendation to.
Review.
All right,
Okay,
so it kind of leaves it in this gray area,
yeah.
Okay.
all right?
I think the public records of recording will be clear on
It's
that,
gray area, it's not.
you know, what we can do and what we can't do.
Exploring options. Any further discussion regarding the recommendation to approve with those additional items?
So there's just the 5 items from Dahlstrom?
No,
No.
we have the additional items from Mr. Leiden's memo.
Okay,
We have the, clarity to exempt from permit for the burning section and the PC quorum section. Are there any additional amendments at this time? We're still gonna do the tree
okay,
piece, but we're gonna do that at a later time when we have the list of street trees.
okay, got it. Happy.
Okay,
Okay, and you did put in about quorum.
right,
Yeah.
Is it appropriate for me to call the question?
this time. All right, so then we'll call for a vote. All in favor, go ahead and raise your hand.
Or do we have to have a roll call?
It says if there is not a unanimous, then we will roll call.
So we have unanimous decision to recommend approval to the city council of the road work with the, 4 additional elements that were identified, including the 4 other items in the Dahlstrom.
Okay.
8 total.
This will go to city council for hearing and decision.
Madam Chair, could I add one thing I'd like to see on the record? And that is to say thank you for the incredible work that Mr. Leiden, Marcy and her compatriots, and the city staff have done. I have written code myself. It's monstrous work.
That's fantastic. So, thank you.
yeah, thank you.
And then we'll start once the dust settles and everything else, and, I think we have, I think it's maybe one of the last elements of the master plan and the transportation plan and everything else. And we get a planner on board, hopefully now we can start doing some more fun projects.
Do you have any idea of when you're gonna be able to actually make an offer to somebody?
So what I'm telling the applicants currently and what we are basing it off of is I'm hoping to make a decision before I leave on vacation on August 10th. So, hopefully I can have, panel results and tallies back before, I leave on vacation, and then I can make that call before I leave and make the offer.
Well, I had volunteered to be on a panel, but I haven't heard anything, so.
Check your email. I emailed out to, I don't necessarily have your email yet, so, make sure that I have your email. I think everybody else.
You can just be sent to my regular email, because I don't have a
All right.
city email yet.
And I emailed it out to the city council members and planning commissioners, I think,
Friday.
prior to any of the interviews. And
Okay.
so I've got a few, folks showing up for a
Okay.
few of those things.
Okay. So the next item on our agenda is the Parks and Transportation System Development Charge Methodology Actions.
So, Todd had texted me while we were going through and asked me to kind of give a brief presentation on this because they weren't planning on being here.
Okay.
But they did present this on their behalf in our presentation on their system development charges and what
Is
they're
it
talking about.
significantly different from the presentation that we had at the,
No.
Last meeting?
Mostly the same with one other option. They presented a hybrid option,
Okay.
right?
which is basically a little more reasonable between the three.
Okay.
So you have your three options. The low is like the least defensible, maximum number that they think that they might be able to get by if the developer's paying for a large sum of it and the city doesn't really have to take any responsibility, and we use the minimum estimate. Then there's the maximum defensible, which is using the maximum allocated costs from our engineers at DKF and others to say, this is what the whole project cost might cost us if we don't have any developer input. The city had to undertake all these projects on ourselves. And so that was the high end. And then the hybrid is a mix of those two, where there's some developer input and some city input, and breaks down the calculations. And now, what it did is it took us from the very high end on one side to the very low end on the other, to somewhere right in the middle currently. Now, nothing's finalized yet, but as these come forward, these rates might change. So the FCCs are split up in two different mechanisms. One is the transportation fund and one is the parks fund, and they're kind of broken down in that sense. The system development charges essentially go off of a capital improvement list. And so we've tasked FCS with developing a capital investment list. I'm probably not going off in the right structure of this presentation, but what have you. That list will be presented with their system development report, which you should have a copy of this one, right? So on the back end of this is an appendix, and then the appendix also has a list of per unit costs and general costs associated with our improvements, and that's transportation, parks, and otherwise. Those are essentially tallied and numbered and came up with an estimated cost to come up with our total system development charge. So system development charge are assessed at the time of building for like single family, commercial, industrial, what have you, whenever they are developed. Developers can get credit by developing any of the items that are on that list and then submitting for reimbursement of those charges. So what Todd and folks at FCS have done is they've drafted this methodology system that the city needs to adopt in order to assess the system development charge on those houses. The system development charge would be citywide, so it would be applied to any new development, whether it's on this side of King City or that side of King City or anywhere in between. Because the system development funds will be applied equally from all sides. So that includes intersection amendments over here at 99W, improvements to roadways, sidewalks, crossings, things of that nature along Fisher, intersections on Fisher, Beefhead, intersections throughout the city that might need improvement, like 116th or, Royalty and 116th, anything that was flagged in our transportation system plan as needing some improvement are included in those costs. So that's why the system development charge is citywide versus just Kingston Terrace. Really not going off of this very well, but, oh, gotcha. So the slide that Ronnie has up here currently is how they've developed this system development charge and the methodology behind it, and how, through their system, they're determining what the per unit cost is supposed to be, right? They've also proposed a system that has a sliding scale, in there, and it would be a square footage element, like if you had an 800 or 900 square foot unit versus a 3,000 square foot unit, your system development charge would be on size scale basis. That results in some debatable benefits and some debatable, cons, I suppose, to that method. And I think that deserves some more discussion on how that really irons out, and if it's actually a more equitable solution from just a straight across fee. As it is, even with the hybrid system, we still have a sliding scale versus, but it's not necessarily based on solely square footage, it's based on the number of transportation trips you would generate, which is in itself its own sliding scale.
I've been through this kind of thing before, and a couple of jurisdictions that I've checked into have a base fee and then the sliding for using the items like the square footage, et cetera, involved. Is that a possibility?
I think that's what Todd's trying to propose, is the sliding scale such as that. And so, we had talked a little bit about trying to make it more equitable so that the low-income person doesn't get priced out of a housing unit. And so, and putting more of the burden equally shared off of the higher-end product. And we were talking with a few of our stakeholders on how that might apply and what that might look like, and if it would still result in marketable products. And I think there's some more that we still need to hash out on that front. But it is being refined and getting closer to something that seems more equitable and reasonable on all fronts. And hopefully we have a product at the end of the day that results in a successful project and not one that is not financially feasible, right? So we are trying to walk a little bit of a tightrope here and make sure that we are satisfying our stakeholders, meeting the objectives of the plan, and also providing a beneficial product at the end of the day for our future residents. Some of the numbers that you see Ronnie putting up now just kind of estimate what that transportation growth component might look like. It also illustrates what the trips are estimated to be and how we might assume Kingston Terrace to grow over the next 5, 10, 15, or 20 years. The rates that we would apply, so when you look at a single-family dwelling and you apply the TSC, what ends up happening is you would go off how many trips that particular unit would be generated. And so what he's identifying here is the ITE, which is an engineering manual, that identifies how many trips an average home or an average business is going to generate. And that would help determine what the system development charge would be for transportation. This was the high end, so alternative one was this high end, and when we looked at this as well, so you're aware, the transportation fee ranged from, when we added the multiplier of the sliding scale for square footage, this could go up to almost $25,000 for a single-family home that's 2,600 square feet or larger, and then it could slide down to, I think it was about, 12,000, I think, on the lower end for a smaller single-family dwelling at, 1,000 or 1,500 square feet. That's where the sliding scale went, and that's how much it varied. Just so you know, if we add the square footage multiplier in there as a variable, it would modify that rate down to about 10 or up to 20, just to give you a range of what ends up happening. And the same would go for the park. So if you did have that sliding scale, in addition to the base fee, it could again go down to like 7 or up to 15 or 16, right? So, just being aware of what that means. If you have a single-family house that's 2,600 square feet, you could end up paying a system development charge of almost $40,000 based on that sliding scale on what we were figuring on taking in. And on the opposite end of that, if you just had a small lot single-family dwelling, you could potentially be paying $120. So one end you have 20, and on the other end you would have 40. So it's almost a doubling effect of the system development charge. Just something to talk about. I think this is the one that we were going with, right, Ronnie? The recommendation. It's the middle one. Yeah, so this is the revised one here that I think that Todd had identified as being the one that's a little more palatable to both the market as well as to what our needs are as a city, and kind of is in the middle ground. It puts a little bit of the cost burden of some of the street and infrastructure pieces on the developer.
And we're
to build.
pretty close to what's going on.
It does, it puts us right in line with
River
River Terrace
Terrace
and
and-
everybody else.
Okay.
Actually a little bit less than where River Terrace is, but it does put a lot of the charges and a lot of the onerous on the shoulders of the developer, and we would need to make sure that that happens through development agreement.
We'll go to the next one, because this next slide says recommended for adoption is a hybrid, all three.
The next
Okay.
slide.
Yeah, you wanna go to that one, Ronnie? The next slide.
That one.
Number 15.
That's like a lot more like in the middle of the other two.
Yeah. Sorry about that. It still results in roughly $15,000 on a typical unit and $10,000. So you're still at right around $25,000 for the city's fee. But when you add in the sewer, water, and all the other, the CET, excise to school, excise tax, all those, then it ends up in that 50,000 plus range, you know, and so that's where we were trying very hard on trying not to have a $75,000 system development charge right out of the gate, right? And I think with these adjusted down and with this hybrid option, it puts us estimated right at $50,000 for an average unit, which is a little bit less than River Terrace, but more than others. So I think we're right squarely in the middle now. But as I was saying, it does put a little more onerous on the developer to actually develop a lot of the infrastructure through an implementation of the development agreement. And then it pulls back the big projects that we think are probably outside of the scope of what we can expect or try to have the developer do. And that's usually your last mile connection, your quarter mile connection, your ravine crossing, what have you. So the things that are outside of the regular scope and scale of a subdivision.
But they will get a credit for doing it. Excuse me, my asthma's acting up, sorry. The half-street improvement
Yeah.
and the appropriate drainage, storm drainage, infrastructure.
Yeah, they built it through their area, like I think Fisher Road's probably one of the easiest ones to talk about because it's probably one of the largest, infrastructure projects on our list, along with Beef Bend or something to that effect. But if they did, the Beef Bend improvement on the south side, and they included the multifamily trail, and they did the curve and the bike lane, and they did the half street improvement to Beef Bend, well, that would be a creditable, expense. The same would be for the Fisher element, everything over what the local street requirement would be to make sure that Fisher is meeting the collector standard, would be something that would be reimbursable. Intersection improvement, to meet the intersection mobility requirements, those sort of things, those would be, also creditable. And so those are things that we try to work out in the development agreement phase, to make sure that we lay out all those costs ahead of time, and so that, there's not any confusion or, misrepresentations on that thing, so everyone knows what they're getting into at the, on the.
Now, is this at the pre-app stage that you go through all this, or after the application is, oh, this is with the annexation application?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think that's the way that we structured it, is that you go through the annexation and the development, a developer agreement, process at the same time, identifying those infrastructure needs that would need to happen, what would be creditable and how much those look like. And then, of course, what would end up happening in the end would be, the developer would need to bring in their, receipts for that work.
Right.
And, receive the credit for that. And then we were talking about getting creative so that they don't get double billed, and trying to figure out ways of doing this with Stacy in the audience here, who's been working with us with CCD, on how we can fix this up so that those, requirements come a little bit later. So as rooftops are coming, those requirements start being paid down, instead of having them have a large sum required up front, and then having to go and build it in order to get the large sum back,
Right.
right? So instead of getting double billed up front and having that large, financial outlay up front, having it laid out incrementally or more incrementally, so that it's more affordable and allows them not to take out the big chunk of money up front. So, I'm working with Todd on how that comes, and developing in this report a system that would allow for incremental, payments on the work. I think that actually in his report,
I'm thinking that the report, it said something about semi-annual payments.
it is in the report, yeah, and I think he's
It
trying
looks like spread
to,
over 10 years.
and I think that's what he was trying to do by that, is make it so it's more affordable and that payment is done.
Yeah.
So need some sort of, agreement, so that those works are put into place.
So are we entertaining a sliding scale by development size? Is that part of what hybrid 2 is?
The alternative 3 is just the base, system development charge, and what Todd has added in is the option to go with the sliding scale for the square footage.
Yeah, and so that's what option 2 is, correct? Oh, excuse me.
I think it was, I could be mistaken. He has it down as like the scalable SDC by home size, so it's the, on page, it's the, can you go to the next slide? Actually, it's just slide 23, Ronnie. But this is the hybrid scenario with the sliding scale.
Yeah.
Kind of shows you what the different home types would be and how much the, calculated SDC might be.
Okay, what's a state? What is that type of housing?
2,600 square feet.
Oh, that's the
Yeah.
big house, that's the big house,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, it's actually 35, we moved it up to 3,500, it used to be 2,600, but we kind of tried to adjust it, so it was.
I can't imagine anybody down there's gonna be building houses that big.
The problem was, is that when we had it at 2,600, your typical house, you know, or that mid-sized house for a family, 3-bedroom family unit, single family, is usually right around 2,200 to 2,400 square feet. And now it's getting hit pretty hard And so I think that's why he moved it up to the 3,500 square feet. So we've done some modifications from where we were at just a couple weeks ago to now.
Okay.
Kind of address those housing types, make it where we felt it, we still get the bulk of our FDCs, but be on a more equitable level. Does anyone have any questions on this front?
No. Not me.
Should we ask for comments from our But, so these are kind of the options that he's throwing out there, if this is something that is.
Well, now, we're just hearing a report. This goes straight to city council for that.
That's correct, yeah. But I wanted to present it to you, give you an opportunity to review it, and if you, had any feedback that you wanted me to give to our consultant, prior to the city council meeting on August 9th, any input that you might have, and relay it.
I just think, I mean, I appreciate you giving us the report. Certainly makes sense, with my history of doing this kind of stuff in other jurisdictions. Makes sense.
Discussion or further comments?
Go back and slide on.
What slide are we going back to?
Here's where we would, kind of,
What slide is that? 21?
this is where we kind of land
Okay.
with the hybrid scenario that, Base was kind of using.
Yeah, that's what I,
Remember, 3,000 less.
this is useful to see where we are in the grand scheme of things.
I think River Terrace was at 53 and we were at 51 with the hybrid.
Have they come up with any ideas of what they're gonna do in River Terrace too? Are they gonna use basically the same?
I think they were planning on using the same, but I'd have to do another one.
I know they have to go through that. It's, formally, the county is signing off on the 16th with the planning commission.
They'll start their heavy master planning and everything else shortly, I believe. And with that, they'll have to do a per unit cost, very similar to what we have, and I think they'll find that their costs have gone up and.
By the way, when our plan, got approved by the county commission, my memory is it stayed at 820 until we formally annexed, and then switched the zoning at that point.
Oh, yeah, F20, right?
F1, yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's what happened, in Kingston Terrace as well, as the county zoning is currently
Still
on
there.
it. It will stay on it until that area is annexed into the city, at which time, we would have to apply some zoning. There's some elements that we would have to do prior to bringing the parcels in. I know something near and dear to us lately has been the, lake and wetland inventory. That would have to be done for all areas prior to annexation as well. That's no small process, so that is it's
Can
almost
we
a
not
year-long
adopt-
process.
Can we not adopt what Metro's done?
Well, I think that's where we're talking currently, is saying that Metro's already done a regional, lake and wetland inventory for all areas that is brought into your growth boundary. And Metro has Title 13, which the rest of us are required to adhere to. So there's some conversations that need to be had, to really hash out all the details, but I believe in my junior law cap and degree and everything else, that, by satisfying Metro Title 13, we've satisfied all those elements, but, there's jury's still out, I guess, so we'll find out.
Yeah,
We'll find out in the near future.
that's probably an issue that could end up be going to LCDC.
Yeah, potentially, we'll see, I mean, our job is to make sure that our plan complies with our
Yeah.
regional acknowledged plan, which is governed by Metro. So, as a city within the metro region, as part of metro, that's our governing document for that plan.
Okay, I have another question that's sort of related but not related. Renovation. How are we gonna get out there? Are we gonna cherry stem on Beef Bend, and when and if are we gonna do that?
Yeah, so we'll need to reach an agreement with Washington County on annexing some of their land, their right-of-way, or taking ownership of the right-of-way underneath Beef Bend. That might be a clean air system. So what we could do with the application for annexation is assume ownership of the land underneath, and then acknowledge that Washington is still a Washington County facility on King City right-of-way once it's transferred. And then that would basically permit us to do your typical cherry stem annexation and allow those developers or those property owners who are interested in developing their property to annex in. My guess would be that would be annexing Beef Bend, 137, potentially
For the Myrtle Lane?
Myrtle. We probably need to annex the roads along that pathway, so that that provides stems for these folks. So, but let's just start with the big one. We annexed Beef Bend out to Roy Rogers and Roy Rogers down to the Falls.
And Elsner.
Yep, along that, those are the two big ones.
Yeah.
And then you have Elsner, which would then come next, and then you would have all the other side streets, in between.
Well, wouldn't we
155th, 150th.
be having to get to that project sooner rather than later, since,
Yeah, I think when the applicant comes in with a proposal for annexation, we would need to annex the road stems at that point in time too.
and that doesn't come down, so. Or, some jurisdictions it goes to planning commission, and some it goes straight to city council, and I honestly don't know what the rule is here in King City.
Well, we're designing that today. What is it,
boy, the previous ones, I don't know if it's gone to planning commission.
I know previously it just went to city council,
Yeah.
and, I mean, we just did the code work for the annexation. But it doesn't have a process under type 3A.
Didn't come up. Yes.
Hang on, we're gonna look in our brand new code that the
Yeah.
planning commission recommended for approval today. And, we did an annexation component in here that walks through the process of annexing a piece.
We just didn't do any annexations while I was on the, oh, wait a minute, we did the
2017 one, which went to the.
did it go straight to council? Okay, yes, I forgot about Highland.
Public hearings because it was an ordinance.
So it's
Ah.
type 3.
Okay,
So the annexation is a type 3, so it would still come to the planning commission for a recommendation.
okay, okay.
But see, before, we didn't have, we didn't have our own annexation code.
Right.
So, what we did was follow the ORS, and the ORS just goes straight to the
City council,
and
okay.
process through.
So now now the annexations will come through, okay,
It would follow the type 3
right,
procedure,
okay.
So basically, we would have,
council
So
recommendation.
there'll be a hearing and recommendation, yeah.
Yeah.
I just wanted to know what the current process is.
Current process is the ORS, which requires a,
and
51%, 50 plus 1.
Yes, of the, property owners and the voters, yes,
and voters, yeah.
yes. No, I know what the process was, but as I said, every jurisdiction does it just a little bit differently.
It was interesting because I think the area south of Fisher, we had 51% of the voters that were down there, but we couldn't get the landowner, who is Cal M, to sign on, right?
Yeah.
we couldn't get a hold of them, we couldn't get their property management.
Are you talking about the
They were the apartment or the mobile homes.
the mobile home?
Mobile homes in the apartment complex, and we needed the owners of those two.
And you
install
still
condoms.
haven't been able
But
to.
they own like 75% of the total land area,
Yeah.
and so you can't get that area annexed as a whole if you can't get Cal to sign on, because they're.
You have to annex around them,
Yeah, so then you'd have to annex little chunks instead of the whole. And that
but
makes
maybe then you can create an island.
it Possibly, yeah, it might be able to create that.
The river's on the other end. Huh?
No,
Okay, so moving back to the agenda. Any other discussion regarding this, Gretchen?
no, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
I'm sorry, we got on to annexation and
Is there any staff report beyond what you've provided? Okay, any commissioners report?
I'm glad to be here.
We are glad to have you. All right, then on that, we have reached the conclusion of today's planning commission meeting. And I will go ahead and close that at, I need to take a motion to.
I move adjournment, or did you do it first, Carol?
Move.
All right, I'm seconding.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, and I'll close this meeting at 12:23 on July 25th.
Six.
Thanks for your patience with the, system development piece.
Oh, I have to go see my husband out of
Thanks for your
the,
cooperation on it.
Look at it a second time.
Thanks, you guys.
oh,
Would you like this?
well, just me, I'm gonna get it replaced
Okay.
in November, and it's just,
Ready. Got it.
so I'm gonna go get one more cortisone shot next week, and hopefully that'll ease it. I can't have it less than 3 months before surgery, so.
So, Keith, what Moses is saying is that you're saying for the criteria for trees and parking areas.